I never thought the night my wife went out for a simple celebration would be the night our entire world came crashing down. Since the day we met, Laura had been the heart and soul of our family. She had this vibrant, magnetic energy that could make anyone feel at ease. From the moment we crossed paths at a friend's party nearly 19 years ago, I was hooked. Even after all these years, that spark in her hadn't faded. Life as a police officer had taken its toll on me. The job left me skeptical and often exhausted, but Laura always had this uncanny ability to lift the weight off my shoulders, even when she didn't realize it. She was more than just my wife, she was my best friend and confidant. Laura believed in the good in people, a quality I admired but found difficult to emulate after years in law enforcement. When I retired, it was bittersweet. Transitioning from the unpredictable chaos of the police force to the steadier rhythm of life as a contractor was no easy feat. Meanwhile, Laura continued her busy role as an executive assistant at Marshall & Company. As I took on a more hands-on role at home, raising our son, Ryan, became my main focus. I leaned into the predictability of our family routines, finding solace in them. But that evening, something shifted, and I wasn't ready for it. It was nearly 5:30 p.m., and Laura hadn't come home from work yet. Normally, she would walk in shortly after 4 o'clock, her job wrapping up in the early afternoon. Since her former boss, Peter Marshall, passed away 2 years ago, his daughter, Caroline, had taken over the company and kept Laura on as her trusted assistant. On most days, if Laura was running late, she'd call or text to let me know. But tonight, there had been nothing. Upstairs, Ryan was already home from school, rushing through his homework so he could enjoy some TV time. I tried to shake off my worry, telling myself there was no reason to jump to conclusions. But as the minutes dragged on, a sinking feeling began to creep in. By 5:45, I couldn't wait any longer. I grabbed my phone and called Laura's cell, but it went straight to voicemail. After leaving a message, I started pacing the room, unable to silence my concerns. Just as I was debating what to do next, the front door swung open. There she was, balancing several takeout bags from Tony's Trattoria. Laura breezed into the house, dropping the bags on the kitchen counter and giving me a quick kiss on the cheek as she passed. "Sorry, honey," she said, unpacking containers of pasta and salad. "I had to stay late and didn't take anything out of the freezer for dinner, so I picked up something from Tony's. Hope that's okay." "Of course," I said, though my voice betrayed my lingering concern. "I was just worried." "Why didn't you call?" She sighed, glancing at me apologetically. "I forgot to charge my phone last night." By the time I got to the car, it was completely dead. It wasn't the first time we'd had this conversation. One of my few pet peeves about Laura was her habit of letting her phone die or leaving it on silent, making her unreachable when she was out. "I know it drives you crazy," she added with a sheepish grin. "I'll plug it in after dinner. Promise." Her explanation seemed reasonable, and I tried to let it go. But as we sat down to eat, something about the evening still felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, and maybe I was just overthinking things. Yet, deep down, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was the start of something I wasn't prepared to confront. I'd often bring up her forgetfulness, and Laura's response was always the same: "You're right, Jack. I'll do better." She'd make a real effort for a few days, but before long, things would slip back to normal. It was frustrating, but over time, I learned to live with it. It was one of those quirks that came with loving her. Laura was in high spirits during dinner that evening. Most of the conversation revolved around our 7th-grade son, Ryan, who was excited about his upcoming baseball tryouts but equally annoyed with how much homework his math teacher, Mrs. Fielding, had been assigning. As part of our routine, we let Ryan have the TV to himself until his 9 p.m. bedtime. Early on, Laura and I decided he wouldn't have a TV in his room, a rule he frequently complained about. For the same reason, we didn't have a TV in our bedroom either. We valued our sleep and the time we spent together without distractions. And when it came to closeness, well, we managed that part at least 4 times a week. It made us something of an outlier among our friends, many of whom were glued to their TVs in multiple rooms of the house. Some even had one in the kitchen, a habit Laura and I couldn't wrap our heads around. To give you some context, I'm Jack Sullivan. I retired last year at 50 after a long career as a patrol sergeant with the county police department. Thanks to the state's retirement system, military veterans like me could buy back their service time and count it toward our police pensions. My 4 years as an Army Ranger gave me the credit I needed to retire after 25 years of service. The physical demands of police work, combined with my part-time handyman jobs over the years, left me in pretty solid shape at 51, with a lean, strong frame. Since retiring, I've turned my side hustle into a full-time contracting business. With the connections I made over the years doing small home improvement projects, I've never had to advertise. My reputation for quality work keeps my phone ringing, and word of mouth has brought me more clients than I ever expected. Laura, who's turning 45 next month, was 25 when we got married. I was 31, and had just started my police career. We met at a mutual friend's party, and I was taken with her from the start. The details of our courtship aren't important, but let's just say I knew from the beginning she was the one. Almost 2 decades later, I still felt the same way. Laura still has the same wavy, shoulder-length brown hair, piercing blue eyes, and captivating smile that first drew me in. At 5 feet 8 inches and still a size 8, she hasn't changed much since the day we met. But it was never just her looks, it was her lively, warm personality that truly won me over. She has a habit of seeing the good in people, which can sometimes make her a little naive about their motives. That might just be my own cynicism talking, a trait I picked up after years in law enforcement. As an executive assistant at a mid-sized international company, Laura earns a solid salary. Combined with my expanded contracting business, we're financially comfortable. We've always been best friends, and we approach our marriage as a true partnership. We share responsibilities, parenting, cooking, and household chores, though some tasks naturally fall along traditional lines. Laura doesn't touch yard work, and I stay out of her laundry room. I learned that lesson the hard way after ruining a few of her favorite blouses by mixing colors. After dinner, Ryan headed to the living room to watch TV, while I stayed behind to help Laura clear the table and load the dishwasher. Once the kitchen was clean, we followed our usual routine, a cup of coffee before heading to the den to talk or read together. Tonight was no different, except for what Laura casually brought up as she set a steaming mug in front of me. "Connie got a promotion to head up the London office," she said. "And if it's okay with you, we were thinking of going out to dinner tomorrow night to celebrate. Maybe even dance a little." I nodded, though the name didn't immediately ring a bell. To be honest, I didn't keep track of Laura's work friends. Not wanting to seem disinterested, I decided not to mention that I couldn't remember who Connie was. Instead, I focused on the part that caught my attention. "Just the two of you dancing?" I asked. "Of course," she replied with a reassuring smile. "It'll just be for a few hours. I'll be home by 11. I wasn't thrilled about the idea. Laura rarely went out with the girls, unlike many of our friends' wives, but I trusted her and didn't want to seem overbearing. Reluctantly, I agreed. The next evening, when I got home from work, I asked Ryan what he planned to make for dinner for himself and me while Laura was out. "Chicken pot pies," he said confidently. I frowned. I couldn't stand pot pies, they always reminded me of their unhealthy sodium levels and high calorie count. Still, seeing how proud Ryan looked about his choice, I decided to let it slide. He'd been such a great help these last couple of years, stepping up as he got older, and I didn't want to dampen his enthusiasm. Laura was finishing up in the bedroom when I went to check on her before she left. She looked stunning in a simple black dress that hugged her figure just right. As she spritzed on a little perfume, she turned to me with a smile. "What do you think?" "You look amazing," I said honestly, though there was still a faint unease in my chest. "Have fun, but don't forget your phone this time." She laughed. "I won't. I promise." I watched her go, telling myself everything was fine. But as the night wore on, that small nagging feeling didn't quite go away. 2 years. That's how long Laura had been working with Connie, and tonight she wanted to show her appreciation. Connie rattled off his words in just a few seconds, but there was something in the way he spoke, a slight air of superiority, his eyes subtly sizing me up. My instincts finally kicked in, and I responded. "Well, Connor, there must." "Call me Connie," he interrupted cheerfully. "Everyone does." I didn't need more clues. The pieces clicked into place, and the realization hit me like a freight train. With a firmer tone, I replied, "Well, Connie, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Give me a moment." Before I could finish, Laura appeared. Her expression was tight, her lips pressed together as if she were trying to calm herself before unleashing a storm. When she finally spoke, her voice carried more anger than I'd ever heard from her before. "Well, Jack," she began, her tone sharp and cutting, "I think I'm the one who's shocked and angry here. First of all, you've practically accused me of letting another man seduce me. Your insinuation isn't just insulting, it's deeply hurtful. And secondly, I've worked with Connie for 2 years. He's always been a perfect gentleman, never once inappropriate or disrespectful." I clenched my jaw as she continued. Her words stung, but they didn't quell the anger simmering inside me. That anger wasn't just directed at Laura, it was also at myself. Why hadn't I stopped her from going out in the first place? Why had I ignored the warning signs? By allowing this evening to happen, I felt like I'd failed, not just as a husband, but as a protector of our relationship. Thinking back to the day before, when Laura first mentioned her plans, it was clear she deliberately avoided using words like he or him, instead referring only to Connie. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Now, it felt calculated, as if she'd tried to downplay the situation, knowing it might raise questions. "Han," she added, rolling her eyes at my silence. "Plenty of men call their female friends Han. It's just a casual term of endearment. And as for the word date, sure, maybe it was a date in the loosest sense of the word. But not in the way you're interpreting it." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But I couldn't shake the unease building inside me. Laura's nonchalance didn't match the gravity of the situation. Her calm dismissal of my concerns only deepened my doubt. "You're right," I said finally, though the words felt hollow. "I'm sure I'm reading too much into this." Laura didn't respond immediately. She stared at me, her frustration softening slightly, as if she wanted to bridge the gap between us but didn't know how. Instead, she sighed, turned, and walked out of the room, leaving me with my unanswered questions and growing doubts. Back at home, Ryan and I ate our chicken pot pies. For the first time, I couldn't enjoy mine. The savory crust and filling tasted like ash in my mouth. Ryan, oblivious to my turmoil, looked up and asked, "When's Mom coming back?" I had already told him she was out with a girlfriend, and I saw no reason to change the story now. There was no way I'd admit that his clueless father had unwittingly let his wife go out on what now felt like a date with another man. That's exactly how I saw it, a date. A stupid, naive lapse in judgment on my part had allowed this wolf in sheep's clothing to insert himself into our lives. By 11:30, I was pacing the living room, resisting the urge to call Laura's phone. She had said she'd be home by 11. Maybe she got caught up. Maybe the traffic was bad. The excuses I made for her were weak, and I knew it. By 11:45, I couldn't hold back any longer. I grabbed my phone and hit dial. I knew Laura's original plan to be home by 11 had shifted, but I still expected her to answer when I called. I wanted to hear her voice, to have her reassure me she was on her way. But once again, the call went straight to voicemail. I didn't bother leaving a message this time. The fact that her phone went directly to voicemail told me it had been turned off intentionally. That thought only fueled my frustration. Why would she need to turn off her phone? At the Chop House, Laura and Connie were finishing their meal when the band began playing a slow number. When Connie extended his hand to her, she hesitated for only a moment before letting him lead her to the dance floor. His hand rested lightly on her back as they swayed to the music. Another slow song followed, and Laura, feeling the effects of her last drink, didn't object. She was relieved to lean into Connie's steady frame as dizziness began to set in. Sensing her discomfort, Connie suggested they take a break, guiding her back to their booth. This time, he slid in beside her rather than sitting across the table like before. Laura barely registered the shift in his behavior, nor did she notice his hand lingering on her back as he helped her sit. By 1 a.m., I had called Laura's phone 5 times. Each attempt ended with the same frustrating result, straight to voicemail. My anger simmered, and a sense of dread began to creep in. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my gut. Laura's memory of the night grew hazy. She remembered Connie saying, "Honey, I think you should lie down for a bit. You don't look well." His arm wrapped around her as he guided her somewhere. She had a vague memory of being in an elevator, unsure of where she was going. The next thing she knew, she was in an unfamiliar room, a bed in front of her. She wasn't tired, but her body felt disconnected from her mind. She heard soft, unintelligible words and then felt Connie's lips on hers. She froze, unable to process what was happening. The next sensation she registered was the cool air brushing against her bare skin. From the corner of her eye, she could see Connie moving closer. Back at home, my phone buzzed, interrupting my pacing. I snatched it up immediately. The name on the screen wasn't Laura's. Confused, I answered, "Hello? Joe Sullivan?" a voice on the other end asked. "Yes, this is Joe," I replied, my worry mounting. A sick feeling churned in my stomach. Who was calling at this hour, and why? My mind jumped to worst-case scenarios. "Joe, it's Terry Connor. Remember me?" Relief momentarily replaced my fear. Terry had been one of the newer patrol officers under my supervision before I retired. An ex-Marine, he was a solid cop, streetwise, and dependable. "Of course, Terry," I said, though my concern was evident in my voice. "What's going on?" "There's something you need to know," Terry said, his tone serious. "I think you're going to want to get here before anyone else does." Adrenaline surged through me. "Thanks, Terry," I said sincerely. "I'll be there as fast as I can." I hung up, my first thought a storm of rage. I'm going to eliminate that prick. But before I could act, I realized I couldn't leave Ryan to wake up alone, unaware of what was happening. I hurried to his room and gently shook him awake. "Hey, son, wake up," I said softly. Ryan rubbed his eyes, looking confused. "Dad? What's going on?" I had little time to think as I gently shook Ryan awake. "Tommy," I said softly, using his nickname, "your mom's been in a minor car accident. She's okay, but the hospital's checking her out. I need to go see her." His eyes widened with worry, but I kept my tone steady, trying to calm him. "I'll be back soon. Just stay in bed, lock the door, and don't worry." He nodded sleepily, trusting me completely. I kissed the top of his head before leaving, grabbing my keys and heading out into the night. Laura's world was spinning, though not from alcohol anymore. The weight of what had likely happened struck her like a physical blow, making her feel sick. She barely had time to reach the bathroom before falling to her knees, retching violently into the toilet. When her stomach was finally empty, she stood shakily, leaning against the vanity for support. She caught sight of her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized herself. Bloodshot eyes stared back at her, framed by a face etched with shame and guilt. Bite marks marred her neck and shoulder, and her hair was tangled and matted in places with what she could only guess was drying seed. The sight made her gag again, but nothing came up. Overwhelmed, Laura felt like she was drowning under the weight of her emotions. Shame, guilt, and disgust crashed over her like waves, each one pulling her further under. She didn't want to look at herself, let alone at the man in the room. The man she had once admired now filled her with pure hatred. But she didn't have the strength to confront him. Instead, she knew what she had to do. Moving quickly and quietly, she got dressed, avoiding his gaze entirely. With one last glance filled with loathing, she slipped out of the room and into the night. It took me just under 15 minutes to get to the hospital. True to his word, Terry was waiting for me at the entrance. The waiting room was nearly empty. It was the early hours of the morning, after all, but I didn't notice much except for him. "Where is she?" I demanded, already moving toward the curtained cubicles. Terry caught me by the arm, stopping me. "Jack, wait. Let me explain," he said quietly. "She's stable, but things are complicated. There are detectives here to talk to her. They suspect something happened." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. Before I could respond, two things happened at once. The ER doctor approached us just as two detectives entered the room. One of them, a man, I recognized instantly, Harvey Berg, an old-school cop with over 30 years on the force. The other was a woman I didn't know. As the doctor stepped closer, Harvey paused, whispering something to the female detective. She frowned, clearly irritated, but nodded and let the doctor take the lead. The doctor, speaking with a slight Middle Eastern accent, addressed me directly. "Are you Mr. Sullivan?" "Yes," I said quickly. "How is my wife?" "She's stable," he said calmly, "but she's very shaken. She claims she was drugged, and she insists on speaking only with you." I felt a surge of anger and protectiveness. "Is she hurt? Does she need to stay in the hospital?" "She has no physical injuries that would require admission," he replied, "but I'll hold off on discharging her until the results of her blood work come back. We've given her a mild sedative to help calm her, but she's awake now. You can see her." "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse with emotion. "Do you have any other questions for me?" The doctor shook his head. "Not at the moment. Let the detectives handle their part, but please, take your time with her." I nodded, steeling myself for what I was about to face. I shook my head. "No, no questions for now," I replied. The doctor gave a small nod. "All right. If anything comes up, just have me paged. The results should be back in about an hour, and I'll consult with you when they're ready." As he turned to leave, I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. That's when I overheard Harvey's voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Look, Anderson," he said firmly, addressing his partner. "I was making felony arrests before you were born. As lead detective, I'm in charge here. Joe Sullivan is a colleague, retired or not, and he deserves some professional courtesy. If that bothers you, go wait in the car or the cafeteria. And if you want to report me, go ahead. I've been looking for an excuse to retire anyway." Detective Anderson's face flushed crimson as she stormed off, her irritation evident in every step. Once she was out of earshot, Harvey muttered under his breath, "Affirmative action." She couldn't catch a gambler at a poker game. He turned to me and gestured toward the curtained cubicle. "Go ahead, Joe." Inside the cubicle, Laura sat on the hospital bed, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression a mix of exhaustion and shame. The sight of her like this, so unlike her usual confident self, stirred a storm of emotions in me. Anger. Hurt. Confusion. Love. It was all there, tangled and impossible to unravel. "Laura," I said gently, pulling a chair closer to the bed. "The detectives will be in soon to take your statement. I need you to be ready for their questions. They'll be intrusive, embarrassing. You'll need to be honest, especially if you're saying what happened was because you were incapacitated by pills or alcohol. Her eyes widened slightly at my words, but she didn't speak. If you try to mislead them, they'll know, I continued. The lead detective has over 30 years of experience. He's sharp. You have to tell the truth. Do you understand? She nodded, her lips pressing together into a thin line. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Jack, she whispered, her voice breaking. You have to believe me. I wanted to believe her. But believing and knowing were two very different things. Before I could respond, Harvey stepped into the cubicle, his presence as commanding as ever. His younger partner trailed behind, arms crossed and a sulky look plastered on her face. Thanks, Harvey, I said quietly, standing to make room. He gave me a small nod, his expression serious. For the record, Joe, I intentionally provoked her anger, he said, gesturing toward Anderson. And I believe Laura is telling the truth. I nodded, appreciating his candor. As the detectives prepared to begin their questioning, I stepped back out into the waiting room, leaving Laura to face what was coming. About 45 minutes later, Harvey emerged from the cubicle. He looked worn but composed. His partner followed a few steps behind, her irritation still evident but muted. Harvey gave me a curt nod as he approached. She gave her statement, he said. We'll follow up as needed, but for now, we'll leave you both to recover. Thank you, I said sincerely. For everything. He nodded once more, then turned and signaled to his partner to follow him. As they left, I stood and approached the doctor, who was finishing some notes at the nearby desk. Doctor, I said, may I ask you a few questions? He looked up, his expression cautious. Though it was clear he considered his primary duty as the attending physician finished, he reluctantly nodded, likely guessing where this was headed. I understand the effects of the pills, I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. But what I really need to know is, do those pills prevent someone from experiencing sexual pleasure? The doctor sighed, motioning for me to sit. He took a seat as well, his tone patient but deliberate. The drugs can dull inhibitions and impair judgment, he said, but they don't completely block physical sensations. That said, under the circumstances your wife described, any response would have been involuntary, not indicative of consent. I nodded, though the answer did little to soothe the storm in my mind. Before I could ask anything else, Harvey stepped into the conversation, his presence steady and authoritative. Joe, he began, his voice firm but compassionate, you've got 20 years of police work under your belt, so I'm not going to insult your intelligence by breaking down every step of the procedure. First, let me say how sorry I am, for you, and especially for Laura. Based on her statement and the lab results, I'm confident she was drugged. Given her inability to consent, she was attacked. I clenched my fists as Harvey continued, the weight of his words pressing down on me. The dirtbag probably spiked her drink when she went to the restroom. She had no idea what was happening and doesn't remember much of the assault. That's what the evidence suggests. Harvey paused, giving me a moment to process. Then his voice softened, but his words cut just as deep. Joe, I won't sugarcoat this. You know how ruthless defense attorneys can be. They'll twist this into something vile, paint her as promiscuous, you as negligent. The media will dig up every detail of your lives, and your son, he'll face backlash from his peers. Even with the evidence we have, the guy could still walk free. It's not fair, but it's the reality. I stayed silent, letting the truth of what he was saying sink in. Harvey put a hand on my shoulder. Talk to your wife, Joe, he said. It's your call, but whatever you decide, I'll support you. The days that followed were some of the most grueling of my life. Laura and I attended counseling sessions, both of us struggling to come to terms with what had happened. Those sessions were emotionally draining, especially when Laura described the few fragmented memories she could recall. She shared how, during the encounter, she briefly opened her eyes and saw Connie above her. That image haunted her, and me. It was during one of these sessions that Laura admitted something else. "I was angry with you," she said quietly, not meeting my gaze. "When we were at the restaurant, I kissed him. I wanted to tweak your nose a little, to hurt you, even if just a bit." Her words hung in the air like a dagger between us. I didn't say anything right away, too stunned to respond. That she had wanted to hurt me, even before the attack, was more than I could process. It wasn't just the assault or the aftermath that cut deep. It was the disrespect. The betrayal. The lies. In the end, I agreed to keep the story out of the public eye, not for myself, but for Ryan. Harvey kept his word, burying the investigation to avoid media attention. We never heard from the district attorney's office again. But not all stories have happy endings, and ours was one of them. The trust Laura and I once had was shattered beyond repair. We tried to rebuild, but the wounds were too deep. The assault was horrific, but it wasn't what ultimately destroyed our marriage. It was everything that came before and after, the cracks we hadn't seen, the betrayals we couldn't forgive, and the lies that piled up until they crushed us both. Eventually, we went our separate ways. And while I'll always care for Laura in some way, the person I used to see when I looked at her was gone. I had warned Laura about the potential consequences of her choices, but she ignored me. She made her bed, and I refused to lie in it with her. While the criminal case against Connie never materialized, the company saw the writing on the wall. Tired of the potential legal risks he posed, they terminated him without cause. Not only did Connie lose his promotion to London, but he was let go without so much as a letter of recommendation. After 12 years with the company, he was left with nothing. Laura, on the other hand, received a settlement to avoid public embarrassment and the costs of a lawsuit. It wasn't justice in the traditional sense, but it was enough to give her a small measure of revenge. We both regretted that our marriage couldn't be saved, but we also recognized the futility of continuing a charade that was hurting Ryan. The home we had built together no longer felt like a sanctuary but a battlefield. For Ryan's sake, we decided to part ways and focus on giving him the stability he deserved. As far as I know, neither of us dated for over a year after the divorce. Eventually, Laura met someone new, a younger man who had been widowed for several years. From what I can tell, he seems like a decent person, kind to both her and Ryan. Though it stung at first to see her moving on, I've learned to let go of my jealousy. The few times we've crossed paths, her new partner has always been respectful toward me, and I've even wished them well. Despite everything, Laura deserves happiness, and I've come to accept that her happiness no longer involves me. She's not the same woman who left the house that night, and I'm no longer the man who watched her walk out the door. For the part I've never shared. My own form of closure came from an unexpected source. During my years on the force, I encountered all kinds of people, the good, the bad, and the truly ugly. One of the latter was Mario, an enforcer for the Irish mob. I'd arrested him 3 times for assault, but he managed to walk free each time, thanks to a mix of slick lawyers and terrified witnesses. 3 months after the incident with Laura and Connie, I ran into Mario at a local diner. To my surprise, he greeted me like an old friend, as though our shared history of arrests was nothing more than water under the bridge. We talked about life, trading small talk like 2 old acquaintances. 5 days later, he called me and asked to meet him at a local bar. I didn't know what to expect, but I went anyway. After a few drinks, Mario leaned in close, his voice low and casual. "I heard about what happened with your wife," he said. "Shame about that guy, Connie." I didn't respond, letting him talk. He gave me a knowing look and continued, "Sometimes, life has a way of balancing the scales. You ever need anything, Jack, you let me know." I left the bar that night unsure of what Mario was implying, and I didn't ask. But not long after, I heard through the grapevine that Connie had been badly beaten outside a club downtown. No one was charged, and no one saw anything. The rumors didn't bother me. If I'm honest, I felt relief. I didn't pursue answers. What mattered was that I had my own kind of closure, even if it wasn't by the book. Today, I focus on my work and raising Ryan. When he turns 18, the house will remain Laura's, and I'm fine with that. My business has done well enough to provide for myself and for Ryan. I don't begrudge Laura what she's been through. She's had her struggles, just as I've had mine. Life has a way of surprising you, leading you down paths you never anticipated. While I wouldn't have chosen this road, I've learned to embrace it one day at a time. Ryan's stability remains my priority, and though the scars of the past linger, they've shaped me into a man who understands the value of moving forward. We've learned from our mistakes, and we've moved on. And in the end, that's all we can do.